I'd like to say a few words about Julian Jaynes and about the book with the funny title which you've heard about, which is called The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, and nobody could ever remember that. Basically, you walk into Borders or Barnes Noble, you ask for a copy of Origin of Consciousness. That you should be able to remember. I mean, I could remember that. What actually happened was that Julian Jaynes was a psych professor at Princeton, and by application he was what you would call a philologist. That's what Nietzsche did for a living. That means somebody who studies ancient languages and culture, and that's not a viable profession anymore. If you're going to do that, it has to be a hobby or an avocation. Jaynes was studying the Iliad and other literature from the Mediterranean basin of the same time period as the Iliad. And what he basically determined was that, the people of the Iliad did not behave the way that we do. Actually, there's an old and a newer part of the Iliad. The people in the newer part of the Iliad behave roughly the way that we do. The people in the older part of the Iliad don't. They don't make decisions. At every point at which you or I would have to stop and figure out which way to proceed or make some sort of a decision, they're being told exactly what to do by inner voices, which they call gods and goddesses. And Jaynes noticed this was essentially true of all literature of the region in that same time period, and the basic conclusion he would come to was that, what we call schizophrenia, they would have called normal, and what we call normal they would have called retarded or insane. And this was true of the time period generally, and then there was a very definite point at which it appeared to stop all over the world. In other words, Jaynes noticed that you had bas reliefs on some of these buildings, particularly Assyria, where you had people sitting there staring at an empty throne, where Marduk, or one of the chieftain gods, used to sit, like, where'd he go, right? In other words, these inner voices had suddenly stopped. They weren't hearing them anymore. Jaynes figured, okay, they paid me to teach here. It's like they've got a major university here. It's like I know they have a medical school. I go there to get cuts and bruises sewn up and, repairs, things of that nature. It's like they probably have a neurophysiology department. And the next day he went and presented himself. And he told him what he was doing, and he asked him, like, what in the world could it possibly be in the human brain that would cause somebody to hear voices if there weren't any voices there, if there were no people or anything around to produce voices. And he figured there was no conceivable way they were going to have an answer to that, but it wouldn't hurt to ask, right? And they said, oh, you want that? Yeah, come on over here, we'll show you what that is. You can imagine that Julian Jaynes was stupefied. I mean, it hadn't occurred to him there would be some sort of an easier, commonly known answer to that, but apparently there was. So what they showed him was that you have the human brain, you have the speech center on the left side of the human brain. That's called the Wernicke area. And what most people don't really know is that on the right side of the human brain you have an analogous area, which, as far as anybody could tell, serves no purpose. It's a, it's a neurophysiological version of the human appendix, and there's a bridge crossover between the two. But what these doctors told Julian Jaynes was that, in particular kinds of cases in which this right side analog to the speech center is stimulated with electrical probes, as occurs in certain kinds of experiments with epileptics, then more often than not, the people involved in the studies claim to hear voices as real as if you were always speaking to them. And the conclusion Jaynes came to was that this right side analog of the speech center was basically being used in the time period of the Iliad. And, this is what he calls the two-chambered mind, or the bicameral mind. That's what the term means. He assumes that broke down at some point. He basically accepted an evolutionary paradigm. He assumed that the human race had somehow evolved into a state in which human societies were being governed by what he called auditory hallucinations. And he refers to this right side analog to the speech center as a hallucinatory area. But that's clearly unworkable. I mean, if you believe in evolution, I don't believe in evolution, but even if you do, then evolution can't work that way. The human race cannot possibly evolve a particular organ which causes the possessor of that organ to experience hallucinations. In other words, some group of humans would start to evolve something like that, and they would quickly be annihilated by other humans who weren't walking around in hallucinatory states. There would be a horrific disadvantage. So you can't have something like that. Jaynes assumed that this situation which had arisen basically ceased to exist due to sociological causes and changes in historical and social environments. I don't see that as workable either. Jaynes was investigating a period of time from roughly the Jewish Exodus until Alexander, during which this thing which he described was dysfunctional. It was becoming increasingly dysfunctional and at the same time being ground out of existence by a very rapid process of attrition, until you get to Zechariah, and as Julian Jaynes noted, Zechariah actually admonishes parents to kill children who go on trying to use their minds this way. So it got to be that bad. By the time you get to Alexander, none of these kinds of things worked anymore. What Jaynes was describing was a number of phenomena, which were essentially ancient religious practices, which involved the use of this right side brain analog. This included the Greek oracles, it included the Jewish prophets, it included electrostatic devices like the Ark of the Covenant, the pyramids. It included things like the ghost story in the Old Testament, the story of Saul and the prophet Samuel and the witch of Endor, familiar spirits. It included several other kinds of things like that. All of these things involve trance states like hypnosis. And the thing which Julian Jaynes didn't really recognize, which you read in Aldegracia's work, is that all of these things also involve electrostatic phenomena. Okay, the word pyramid is a Greek word. It means, the root part of the word means fire, like pyrotechnics or pyromania. The things glow. They used to have like golden tips, which would act like lightning rods. You're talking about St. Elmo's fire, some sort of a plasma physics phenomenon. And basically, like I say, all of these ancient religious practices involve trance states, they involve electrostatic phenomena, and somewhere around the time of Alexander, or somewhere just shortly prior to that, all of these things ceased to work, so that by the time you get to Jesus, it had been several centuries and none of these things had worked. They pretty much passed out of existence. The thing which Julian Jaynes did not look into is the possibility, I guess what he really wasn't looking into was the true antediluvian period, the period just before the time period which he was looking at, the possibility that this thing which he had discovered was involved in normal communications before the flood, normal human communications before the flood, and before the incidents associated with the Tower of Babel, and that's another sort of a story. Thank you.